Hello and welcome back. My name is Venus Green. Thank you so much for joining me today. We are going to be talking about the astrology for the first half of July. Now, this is where I think the story is going to be recognizably changing for most of us. If we just think back to June raised a lot of questions for all of us. July is now going to start showing us where those questions were leading to. And for some people, I think that's going to be very uncomfortable because once the story starts changing, it becomes way harder to just keep pretending like that old version still makes any sense. And this is definitely one of the major themes for the first half of July. Now, if we just take a look at what's happening in the sky, we have Mercury retrograde in Cancer. We have Neptune stationing retrograde in Aries. We have Mars making its conjunction with Uranus in the sign of Gemini. Then we also have the Sun squaring off of Saturn. Venus is going to make her ingress into Virgo. And then as she does, she's going to cross the nodal axis. And then we will arrive at the new moon in Cancer. So this is definitely a period of reflection, but it is not passive reflection. It's going to require you to be engaged, right? There is sitting around and magical clarity will come to any of us. And that's not what the kind of sky that we're working with. This is the kind of astrology that's going to ask us to look at the narratives that we have accepted, the assumptions that we have been operating under, and also the places where we have ourselves mistaking familiarity for truth. Because the issue is not going to be that we don't know something is wrong, right? I feel like we do generally know when something is off. You either feel it, you see it, you notice the inconsistencies in the story. And when we recognize that the story is being shaped in a way that protects someone or a group's comfort or power, or it protects this version of reality that doesn't hold up, well, that's going to require us to take some sort of responsibility for that awareness, right? What are you going to do with that information now that you have it? Pretending like you don't have it is going to make you frustrated. So this is where I think July becomes important. Understanding that the story is changing, knowing that it's going to change, and be present in the moment as things start to move and shift around you. The question is going to be, what are you willing to do about it? What are you willing to change? You're not going to have to be reactive. It doesn't need action in a way that would force you to abandon yourself or the things that you truly believe in, right? But let those new developments move you in a way that doesn't throw you into chaos, right? You want it to be conscious. You want it to be responsive. You want to be acting from a place of maturity. But the lessons for this first half of July, it's not about trying to find some sort of certainty, right? We're trying to be responsive. We're trying to stay in the present moment so that when new information comes in, we can pull it in and analyze it, right? Are we able to adjust when reality gives us evidence that those old stories are not working? And we need to be thinking about, can we truly be honest with what it is that we're seeing, right? Without letting anger sort of become the language that you use and the way that you respond. Quite possibly my bent my nodes video. I don't think that anger is a negative thing. I think used as a tool to help move you forward definitely is something that we can positively extract from having the anger or feeling the anger, right? Because it is about understanding that I am responsible for myself. I am responsible for the story that I fall into, that I believe, that I go along with. And if you can't settle internally how you feel about the story that you are moving forward with, then frustration and anger are probably the only things that you can expect, right? We can't allow another person or group of people to impress upon us something that we don't truly feel in our own heart, right? And this is where I think the forecast really begins, because July is asking us to, not just continue the conversations and all the noise and news that started in June. It wants to know, what are you going to do with that information, right? And in many cases, the answers are going to look different from what you originally expected. Now, one of the challenges of navigating change is that we often don't realize that a story is changing until we are sort of in the thick of it, right? You're inside the shift as it's happening, because we go along making plans with the information that we have available at the time, right? We form conclusions about what needs to happen. We decide what we think is happening after we have filtered that information through our own emotions, right? And we tell ourselves that we understand where things are headed. None of that is wrong or bad. That's how we should move forward, right? You're trying to be in the flow, right? But what about when something moves? What about when there's new information that you didn't expect, right? What about when a person shows their real position to you, right? Or maybe it's a system that finally reveals to you, or you finally see what the actual values of that system are. Right? Could be a conversation that maybe exposes something that had been sort of sitting underneath the surface. And then suddenly the assumptions that we were operating under, they just no longer fit, right? They don't fit the reality that's unfolding in front of us right before our eyes. So this is the reason that I find the first half of July so important. Two things: Mercury's retrograde in Cancer, and then Neptune stationing retrograde in Aries. That happens on July 7th. Both of these transits are going to ask us to reconsider, but they're doing it in very different ways, right? Mercury retrograde is going to pull you back into some sort of review in the sign of Cancer. So that review is emotional. It brings us back to family, memories, belonging, safety, protection. It's all the stories that we carry with us, because those are the things that made us feel secure. Oh, this can bring up maybe old conversations that you've had, old feelings, some sort of assumptions about what it is we think we need. Our emotional narratives are very much shaped by how we respond to the people and the situations around us. And then, of course, Neptune stationing retrograde in Aries, that adds a whole nother layer. Neptune in Aries can blur the lines between inspiration and impulse, between what we recognize as courage and what's really just fantasy. Now, when Neptune stations retrograde, it can bring a moment where we start to question the story behind the story, right? What were we hoping was true? What were we afraid was true? What did we want to believe just because it made things easier? And that word is so frustrating to me, because I feel like so many people just want things to be easy. I don't think we learn much from easy, I just don't. When did we begin to avoid seeing things? Because seeing those things clearly would require us to change or go through some sort of challenge, right? Those things aren't comfortable, but sometimes we're just not attached to the people or the situations. We are attached to the meaning that we gave those things, right? And being in one frame of mind is going to assign a kind of meaning than being in a different frame of mind. And I can't identify those for you, but let's just say being in an emotionally vulnerable position is going to cause you to see things in your life one way, maybe as, taking the easy route, or if I go along, this will, this thing will die down and I won't have to put in so much effort. Choose that if you want to. Okay, choose that if you want to. But we are attached to the version of the story that allows us to keep moving forward without having to confront what the deeper issues are. That's how I see that. And when that version starts to break down, we are going to feel very disoriented. There is nothing else that you can feel. You might feel anger, right? But on some level, you're going to be disoriented. Disorientation is not a sign that things are wrong. Sometimes it is a sign that that old explanation that you have been feeding yourself is not enough, right? The greatest challenge is not trying to determine what is true, but recognizing when an old story no longer explains what we are currently experiencing. And when that happens, your entire story will change. The question is going to be more about whether we're willing to change it or we want to stay here. We want to be stagnant, right? This is where the intellectual and the emotional flexibility will become important, right? We don't want to be operating from some level of indecision, paralyzed because we don't know what to do. You also just don't want to be passive during this time. Not letting people rewrite reality in front of us while we pretend not to notice, right? No. Well, it's a no for me. Flexibility means that we can be willing to refine our understanding when new information becomes available, right? It means that we can admit that our first interpretation may not have been complete, may not have had all the facts. It also means that we can hold this complexity without trying to surrender our discernment. And that matters because during rapidly changing periods like this, people are often going to feel pressured to form some immediate opinions. Got to choose a side. You need to defend a position. You must decide what everything means before the full picture has truly developed. And I don't think that's what the sky is telling us, right? Mercury retrograde and Neptune retrograde are suggesting that some of the stories are still unfolding. Some of the questions are still waiting to be answered. And some situations are going to need more time before their meaning becomes fully apparent to us. That does not mean that we stop thinking about them. It does not mean that we stop paying attention. And it definitely does not mean that we ignore what is obvious to us. It means that we do our best to stay honest. We do our best to stay observant. We leave room for some sort of possibility that we understand something today in one way, and that thing might continue to evolve or change tomorrow, right? That's the first lesson of July. Adaptation begins with recognizing that the story is still being written. Now, while Mercury retrograde and Neptune retrograde are asking us to review and reconsider, another part of the sky is moving in a very different direction. And that is happening on around. We're going to feel it before, but it's exact on July 4th. And that's the Mars-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. So this is one of the major acceleration points of the month. Mars-Uranus has this sort of way of just breaking the rhythm for all of us. Things that were moving slowly are suddenly going to speed up. Conversations are going to take a weird turn. Information is going to be moving fastly. Decisions are going to be accelerated, right? We're almost always going to have some sort of plans shifting and situations that felt like they were sort of settled and just easy. Now they're going to be behaving in an unpredictable manner, right? Because this is happening in Gemini. All of those themes around information, communication, transportation, data, language, public conversations, all of those things are going to become especially important. And this Mars-Uranus conjunction is not quiet astrology. It's definitely not subtle. Mars brings the action, the urgency, the heat, the conflict. Uranus loves disruption, surprise. It wants to offer you freedom and rebellion, right? It wants sudden change. Now, when those two are together in Gemini, it's definitely describing a moment for us where narratives are going to be shifting pretty quickly, right? Something's going to get said, something's going to be exposed, something is going to be breaking through all the noise that we're hearing, right? Disrupts that normal flow of information. And people might have to respond faster than they had expected to. And that doesn't really mean that we need to be afraid of the energy. I don't think so at all. It means that we need to be clear about what we're doing. Mars Uranus is not just disruption. It also brings us breakthroughs and innovation. So it can bring the courage to say what it is that you need to say. It can also bring some sharp turns that would free us from some sort of stale pattern that we can't seem to get out of ourselves. And it also is going to be offering speed as a challenge to us, because when events move quickly, people often become very reactive. They confuse urgency with clarity. Those are not the same thing. They assume that because something feels intense, that it must require some sort of immediate response. I got to do it right now before. No, you don't. Not everything, again, deserves to have this serious impact on our nervous system that sort of throws us into making a decision or some sort of chaos. We don't want to make decisions from a point of chaos. We don't have to give our attention to everything that calls to it, right? We can, let's just say it's a conversation from someone that comes at you. Let's just say it's a conversation, right? And you are recognizing this thing in a different way. You have the option to say, thank you for sharing that with me, acknowledge whatever has been said, but also I need some time to digest this. I need to think about, how does that thing impact me? How does it make me feel? How do I feel about being forced forward, in a sort of sudden way? It's okay to take a pause. And I don't think that oftentimes the person bringing us information wants us to take that pause. That's unfair, right? They've had all this time to build up whatever their story is that they want to bring to us. I also have to have enough time to reflect on those words and, again, how I feel about it, and decide how I want to move forward. And that doesn't have to be right now in this moment today, right? The faster the story moves, the more important it becomes to stay connected to what it is that matters to you. Right? Because if you are not grounded, then you can become very easy to direct, right? You will become very easily influenced by the emotions of that thing. Please remember that emotions are water. Water needs a container. That's all I'm going to say. And I definitely think that, some of these things are absolutely, again, worth naming, right? Because people are confused. People are overstimulated. They're angry. They're afraid. They don't want anything in their life to have to change if it requires them doing more, digging into their grit, right? That doesn't matter. Don't be easily influenced by somebody's overwhelm, right? It is their responsibility to deal with their overwhelmness. I do think it's also easier to pull people into narratives when we feel like we can be the savior, right? Or maybe that thing that they need from us is actually what will serve them. Be cautious about that. We're just way easier to convince that every situation is like an emergency and under these kinds of skies, right? And every little disagreement needs to be treated as a threat. And it's just not that way, right? You're allowed to have time. You're allowed to pause. And I think so few people allow themselves that, right? This is why discernment is so important during the first half of July. Mars conjunct Uranus is going to bring very fast-moving, truths to us. There can be some sort of sudden development, and with a sudden development, we can oftentimes expect that there's an automatic answer, and that's probably not the case, right? If you receive some sort of shocking piece of information, it does still need to be examined. Any sort of strong emotional reaction still needs to be grounded somewhere. So do your best not to shut down, but to allow yourself the freedom to take that information and process it in a way that's meaningful to you, right? The point here is to be more awake, be alert, be responsive. Definitely be willing to ask yourself, what is actually happening here? What am I being told to feel about what's happening? And find the distinction in those things, right? Because that matters. Part of the collective is still really trying to understand what is changing during this first 2 weeks. And there's a whole other part that's already responding to those changes. I don't necessarily think you have to be one or the other. Again, I think astrology teaches us how to hold two truths, how to find the middle ground, right? It's a very, human kind of tension that we are under. We have this feeling that life is asking us for a decision, but we don't know that we have all the information yet, and that's okay, right? Don't be forced into a decision. There's also very much a feeling that adjustments are happening in real time. And again, a lot of people aren't comfortable with that because, it's kind of like, I see it in my head as, a video game where you're bouncing from one plateau to the next, right? You have to figure out how to navigate these things real time sometimes so that you don't fall off, right? The point is not to fall off. The point is to get to a place where I can feel settled with my own values, with my own beliefs, and maybe with my tribe that believes similar things, right? Flexibility is going to be important. The people who are going to be able to navigate this energy most effectively are probably not the people with a very rigid plan, right? Who have all of their things written down and their calendar is full and there is no room for flow or change or redirection, right? Those people are going to have the hardest time. The people who can stay awake, do their best to stay grounded, and revise their plan as the reality does call for that, they're going to have the better time, right? We have to learn to adapt. This is a time of learning how to remain responsive while the reality unfolds. Now, what's also going to be happening just after that is that the reality is going to push back to us, right? After that, Mars-Uranus starts to accelerate the pace. Well, the sun's going to be squaring off with Saturn on July 6th. So this is where reality starts to enter our conversations, right? And oftentimes we see Saturn as sort of a punisher, and he's not. But Saturn is always going to say, we are going to build this thing on a sturdy foundation. I'll have no ricketiness, right? No, we're not building on top of sand and things that shift. We are going to figure out what we're doing before we start to go upward, right? This is a point of clarification. The sun will be in Cancer, so it's concerned with emotional security and family and roots and protection and trying to belong. Saturn is in Aries. That is concerned with responsibility, courage, discipline, independence. It's also about leadership and accountability. So when these two planets square off with each other, there is going to be this tension between what we need emotionally and what reality is requiring from us. It's going to feel like a limitation, a delay, a new boundary, a hard boundary, some level of responsibility. That is always what Saturn is trying to teach us. Without those very things in your life, you are likely to ever have something that's truly stable. That's how I feel about it, right? But I also don't see the sun square Saturn as a bad aspect. Not at all. Saturn is my chart ruler. So I see it as a reality check, right? Saturn's not a villain. It wants clarity. It wants us to have something that's sustainable, something that's mature and workable and again, something that we can actually build upon. And sometimes that's exactly what we need after we have periods of rapid movement, right? Because possibility matters. Vision also matters. New information matters. Breakthroughs matter. Eventually, though, every idea has to meet some kind of reality. Every plan has to have a level of structure in there, and every impulse is going to meet a consequence, just the way that it is. And every truth has to be carried in a way that can actually build something. That's what Saturn teaches us, right? And the last piece here is really important, because some people very much confuse truth with force. Some of that may stem from the feeling of anger, of feeling like one is being forced to either see a truth, but that truth is likely something that is changing something in your life, right? And again, we go back to the word easy. Saturn knows that anything that comes easily is likely not worth having, right? That's just the way that it is. And sometimes we think that if something is true, it doesn't matter how it's delivered. But really, that's impulse, right? And impulse is what we have to understand, especially when something is clearly wrong. And when people keep avoiding the root of the problem rather than just digging their heels in. Especially when maybe we have systems that have been protecting us from having to make any changes, right? Or addressing what is actually happening. That Sun square Saturn is going to remind us that truth needs a level of structure and discipline, right? Truth still needs maturity if it's going to create anything beyond the moment of impact. Otherwise, we might be right, but we're probably not going to be effective. So, we have to pick our poison here. Work hard, dig in, or react impulsively, and, maybe you got a mess to clean up, right? This is one of the lessons that Saturn brings us. And it does that over, a slow sort of period. Again, Saturn is about building. It's about having a good foundation that's built on discipline and structure. So it is asking us to be responsible with our energy, with our words, our timing, and our courage. And I think that around this time on the 6th, that's probably how we're going to feel, right? Discipline without courage can really just become silence. And I am not a fan of silence. I am about naming it. I love that. When you name that thing, you can definitely address it. You can start to analyze it from every single angle. And again, it's not the angle of not just how does it impact other people, but how does it impact me and what does it mean to me, right? What does it mean to me? Because we want to be involved in something that supports our growth and maturity, right? Something that feels like it's protective of us, right? Are we carrying around some things that just don't fit anymore? And if we are, why are we doing that, right? This is going to be the time to take a look at those and do some analysis there. Well, the next aspect that we have is Venus. She's going to move into Virgo, and this is bringing the discernment, right? It's going to become necessary around this time. This is happening on July 9th. And it's meaningful because after that acceleration, right, and then that reality check with Saturn, Venus in Virgo is going to bring some attention back to discernment. Virgo is not interested in performance for the sake of being a performer. It wants to know what is useful. Is this healthy? Does it function, right? Is there a level of refinement needed here, right? What needs correction? That's what Virgo is going to be looking at. Venus in Virgo can bring a more practical approach to our relationships, our money, our value, how we care for ourselves, and also our desire. It's going to ask us to be looking at whether something is actually helping, right? Not does it look good, not does it sound good, and not is it the story that we want to believe. Again, is it useful, honest, and sustainable, right? Does this thing actually have value to me? This is where July is going to move from the sort of dramatic into a more practical level of adjustment on an individual level. Because once we see that old story, right, again, we have awareness that that story doesn't fit. We are going to have to decide what it is that we begin to do differently. Venus in Virgo is going to help us to refine that kind of response, right? It reminds us that care is not always sentimental, right? Care sometimes looks like a correction, looks like a cleaning up of the details. It can also look like telling the truth in a way that can actually be heard. Sometimes it looks like we're no longer participating in those dynamics, right? Because again, it's a story that keeps us stuck, us or everyone. And then the next day on the 10th, Venus in Virgo is going to make its connection with the nodal axis. So when it joins the south node in Virgo, and it's going to be opposing then the north node, which is in Pisces. So this is going to bring us a moment about probably defining what's meaningful in our values, our relationships, the level of service and sacrifice that we bring, but also our spiritual direction. Now, there might be some questions about what we're still trying to fix or perfect or control, and I think that's okay, right? It's also asking us to take a look at whether the effort that we're putting into something is actually helping us move forward. The South Node is what's in Virgo, and that's going to show us where we are over-functioning, over-analyzing, over-correcting, right? That is trying to solve everything through control or critique or usefulness. And that's not the only layer that things should be moving through, right? Because the North Node is in Pisces, and it's asking us, the North Node is our collective direction, right? Where we're heading. So here it's asking for more trust, more compassion, more spiritual openness, right? A level of surrender and connection to something that is larger than just the immediate details. So again, we need to hold on to our discernment, not abandon it, because that's important, right? Pisces, water, without any discernment will turn into confusion and criticism, right? The growth path is learning how to hold both of those things, Pisces and Virgo energy, so that we can find our center within that, right? To see clearly without becoming harsh or without being too naive, right? It wants to refine what needs refinement without trying to just merely reduce it to a checklist. Now, the Venus node moment is going to ask us to examine what it is that we value and whether those values are aligned with where it is that we're headed or trying to take our future. And then on the 12th, we are going to have Mercury cazimi, right? So the sun here is meeting with Mercury in the sign of Cancer. Mercury is still retrograde at this time. So Mercury cazimi is generally a turning point, right, in the retrograde cycle. It's not, again, an automatic answer, and it's probably not that everything that has been coming up during this retrograde is going to be solved, but it is a turning point, right? Some of the confusion starts to disappear, and it doesn't mean that, any of this becomes any easier. I think that's, we still have the rest of the retrograde to go, so that would be not the right statement, I think, but it can also bring just a little bit of insight, right? Something is going to start making sense around this time to make us feel a little more comfortable to move forward, to be thinking about that new direction, that alternative that maybe has popped up in our mind. This is a moment where we can understand, the emotional root of a situation a little bit more clearly. Now, Mercury retrograde in Cancer is also going to be asking us to revisit, right? We're still in that retrograde cycle, all the Cancerian themes about family, belonging, emotional security, and all the stories that we like to keep in our book because those are the things that keep us safe. Mercury meeting the sun is going to ask us to bring some things into focus, right? This might be a point where we realize that certain conversations affected us very deeply. Maybe some old patterns that we keep repeating are now visible to us. Maybe we can understand that our reaction was not only about the present moment and the chaos we were experiencing, but it's really about something that's much older. I'm going to use the word trauma because I think we all have some sort of trauma from our past, especially our childhood. But when those things happen to us, we have a natural sort of reaction to them. And then that's a pattern that we just continue to repeat if we don't take the time to analyze it and why we react that way, right? Maybe I felt safe when that thing happened to me and I was only 6, but now I'm 46, right? Do I now have the ability and enough knowledge to react to a similar situation differently, right? Could also just be that we realize that a story that we've been telling ourselves, or maybe our family has been telling us for a long time. You know how stories just get passed down, right? Those are the things I'm talking about. We need to decide, are those things built on some level of protection for whatever the story is surrounding and the people involved? Are they actually truth, right? Now, I think individual truth can be different, right? My truth is probably not the same as someone else's truth. We have different perspectives. We live different lives. We have different involvement in sometimes the same story. So I'm definitely not saying that, but finding your truth is what's really important, right? Cancer is a very protective sign. It will always remember. It always guards. It always holds on. And it can be a really beautiful thing when it's protecting something that is truly sacred. But it can also keep us very attached emotionally to a narrative that just does not serve our life anymore. It may have at one time, but this time it doesn't. So this Mercury cazimi is likely going to bring up a moment where we recognize the difference here, right? What's worth protecting? What's just familiar? What is something that truly nourishes me in my life? What are the things that we're holding on to just because we're afraid of who we would be if we didn't have that story to fall back on? If we didn't have that, I'm going to call it excuse. If I didn't have this excuse to explain why I am the way I am, what do I do then? Oh, well, now I have to have a new thing. What is your new thing, right? This is the kind of clarity that is likely to arrive. And that kind of clarity can be pretty loud, right? It can come through a conversation, a memory, a feeling. It could also just be a moment of honesty with yourself. You might have that in private, and I think that's okay, but then still you have to deal with the awareness of that, right? And because Mercury is still retrograde, the full outcome isn't really set at this point, right? But we are becoming aware of it. Something important is trying to be revealed, and then in the near future, it wants to be solved, right? It's the moment when something begins to make sense, right? And then we have to work through the final details of that. And then the last thing we get to is the Cancer new moon, right? And this is, it's a beginning, but from the heart, right? The place of Cancer. Well, maybe that's Leo, but the place of making a decision that is truly nurturing. That's how I would say that, right? The new moon happens on 14th of July. And what's important to recognize about this new moon is how different it feels from all of the energy that is surrounding it, right? Because much of the first half of July is about asking us to adjust. The new moon wants us to become intentional, right? New moon is a new seed. It's a new beginning. It's a start. They always mark the beginning of a new cycle, and they offer us a chance to plant some seeds, to set intentions, to focus our energy toward what it is that we want to build as we move forward. But, none of the astrology happens in a vacuum, right? There's always a lot of things going on within the sky, even at the time of a new or a full moon. So, this one is going to come after we've moved through the information that's probably shifted us one way or the other, right? We've had all those accelerated moments, a reality check, then some emotional review, right, with that Kazemi there. So this is going to be a moment really to find a beginning that feels more informed and grounded and honest to you. Cancer always asks us to come back to the foundation. It wants to know what will help me feel secure and protected, also what nourishes me. Because what I'm building is important, and I need to know why that matters to me. These are not questions that someone else can answer or help you with. They are the kinds of questions that you must ask yourself, and you must provide yourself with an honest answer. What you do with that honest answer is also important, right? Because you are planting new seeds around this time, and we don't have complete control of the future, and we're not expected to at this time. What we're being asked to do around the new moon is choose. You choose how you want to participate in the future that's unfolding. After all of that astrology in the first half, your choice does matter. And I hope that's the conclusion that you come to, because adaptation is often very misunderstood, right? People sometimes think that adaptation means constantly changing who we are. No, we're not abandoning ourselves. We are reacting to what is happening around us in a way that has been filtered through logical thought and also our emotion, but comes out the other side with a decent level of maturity, right? And in many cases, we might finally be discovering a direction that is more aligned with the reality, right? And that can be very powerful, because once we stop practicing and participating and protecting those old stories, we can start to begin a new story from a place of truth. All right, we are going to get into the rising signs now. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your support. All right, Aries, your story is changing around home, family, emotional security, and the foundations that you are standing on. Cancer is your fourth house. So the Mercury Retrograde and the Cancer new moon there are asking you to take some time to revisit what feels safe and familiar and emotionally supportive. This is likely going to bring some reflection around family patterns, around your living situations, your private emotions. It's the deeper needs that you're not completely ready to acknowledge just yet. Now, before you can move forward, though, something is likely going to need to be understood at the root level. So at the same time, though, we've got the Mars Uranus in your third house. That's really going to accelerate news, decisions, conversations that you're having, or it's changing your immediate environment in some way. So information can move quickly around this time. You are probably going to have some plans that are shifted or altered, and probably some conversations are going to reveal that the current situation anyway, is just not what you expected it to be before. Neptune is going to be stationing retrograde, and the sun then squaring off with Saturn. Both Neptune and Saturn are in Aries. So that's going to be very personal for you as your first house. You're probably going to be reconsidering who this person is that you are becoming with all of this new information and shifting detail, and also how much responsibility you are actually carrying, right? And maybe it feels like you're carrying it on your back or on your front. I don't know. But whatever it is, the way that you have been responding to life feels now like it's just not the person that you want to be going forward. So the invitation here for you at the new moon is to stay responsive without letting urgency make the decisions for you, right? By the time the new moon comes around, you might be ready to begin again from probably a more honest, emotional place, you know, one that really supports, again, who it is that you're becoming, not just who is the person that you've been and you've built up to this moment. Good luck to you, Aries. For Taurus Rising, your story is going to be changing around communication, information. It's also your money and values and the things that are happening behind the scenes. I'll be asking you to revisit how you are thinking, speaking, listening, and making sense of the information around you. Now, conversations are likely to come back around that you probably had earlier, probably in June, and some decisions might need to be given another look. So something that you thought you understood is probably going to require review, especially if family, emotions, maybe siblings, neighbors, or just the daily logistics of that situation are involved. Now, at the same time, Mars and Uranus is meeting up in Gemini, so that is your second house. This can bring some sudden movements around income, money, resources, your spending. It's also your self-worth. This does not have to be a negative thing, though, but it does suggest that your relationship to stability is probably changing. So you might need to respond quickly to some sort of financial matter, maybe adjust a plan in some way, or just rethink the things that you define as actually being, you know, security for you. Neptune is stationing retrograde, and the sun is then going to square Saturn. Both of those are in Aries at this time, so that's activating your 12th house. So part of the story is also, you know, that there are some internal things happening. You know, 12th house is what's hidden, what's inside, what's behind the scenes. And you might be noticing that you have old fears, maybe some sort of private pressure. It could also be just exhaustion, right? Because we're opposing the sixth house here. But there are patterns of some sort that you usually keep to yourself. And something that is behind the scenes there is going to be asking you to be a little bit more honest with those things. Now, the invitation around the new moon is to slow down long enough for you to hear the things that life is throwing at you. That Cancer new moon, it's probably going to be a time where you are ready to begin again with some clearer communication, maybe having set better boundaries around your energy, but also just being more honest and understanding of what truly supports peace in your life. Good luck to you, Taurus. For Gemini Rising, your money and values, self-worth, it's also about your community and your long-term vision for the future. Now, Cancer is your second house, so Mercury Retrograde and the Cancer new moon are falling there. That will be asking you to revisit what makes you feel secure. And this can bring some reflection around income, spending, resources, but also your possessions, or it could just be, what are those deeper questions you need to ask yourself about what you truly value? You might be reconsidering whether that old definition that filled that the place you want to go in the future. Now, at the same time, the Mars-Uranus is meeting in your sign. So that's your first house. It's going to make that period feel very personal and energizing as well. So you might feel extremely restless. You could be impatient. You might be ready to move. You could also just suddenly be aware that you cannot keep operating from this outdated version of yourself, right? Something about your identity, your body, your choices, or maybe just your personal direction is likely to shift very quickly around this time. Neptune is stationing retrograde, and then the sun is going to be squaring Saturn in Aries. So that's going to be activating the 11th house for you. It'll be bringing up some questions around the friendships you have, the communities that you're involved in, the audience that you have, all of your networks, right? It's also your future goals. So you might be reassessing who are the people that are aligned with your direction and which long-term dreams are still the most realistic, meaningful, or just worth your energy in general. So the invitation is to let change clarify your values rather than scatter your focus. That is also a very big possibility. Now, by the time we get to that Cancer new moon, you might be ready to begin again with some stronger understanding of what supports you materially, emotionally, but also personally. Good luck to you, Gemini. For Cancer Rising, the story is changing around your identity, your self-definition, your private truth, and the way that you are participating in your own life. Now, Cancer is your first house, so that means the Mercury Retrograde and the Cancer new moon are going to be deeply personal for you. This is going to be a review for you of how you see yourself, how you speak up for yourself, what you need, and what version of you is, what maybe a new version of you is just starting to emerge. So you might be reconsidering that old self-image. Maybe it's an emotional pattern. It could also be the story that you've been carrying around about who you are and what you are allowed to want in your life. Now, at the same time, Mars and Uranus are meeting up in Gemini, which is your 12th house. So that is going to stir up some things behind the scenes. And this might bring some sudden realizations. It could be some disruption to your rest. Could be old fears creeping in, right? There's some subconscious patterns that you are reviewing. There might also be some private information that begins to change how you understand a situation. Something that's been kind of operating really quietly in the background, that thing is going to become much louder to ignore around this time. Well, Neptune is stationing retrograde, and the Sun is then going to be squaring Saturn. That happens in Aries. And so that activates your 10th house. It's going to be bringing some questions around things like career. If you don't have a career, it's your visibility, your reputation, authority, responsibility, the long-term direction that you have. You are probably going to be asking whether the role that you are currently playing publicly still matches who you are becoming privately. Now, the invitation is to let your inner truth lead through the adjustment. By that time we get to the Cancer new moon, then you might be ready to begin again with some sort of clearer sense of yourself, right? It's not based on what other people expect you to be, but it's going to be around who you are finally able to acknowledge within yourself, right? That inner private self that only you know. Good luck to you, Cancer. For Leo Rising, the story is changing for you around your inner life, your public direction, your relationships, and what is being prepared behind the scenes as well. Now, Cancer is your 11th house, so that's where you have Mercury retrograde and the Cancer new moon. Those are going to be asking you to slow down and listen to what has been happening beneath the surface. This can bring some big reflection around, or maybe patterns that you are not fully able to name yet. So something may need to be understood on a private level before it actually becomes clear and shared publicly. Now, at the same time, Mars and Uranus are going to meet in your 11th house. So this can really accelerate developments around friendships, communities, networks, collaborations, and your long-term goals. So your group dynamics are probably going to shift. There could be a future plan that changes. There's also maybe the opportunity for you to realize that certain connections or aspirations just don't fit the direction that you feel like you're moving toward in the future. Now, Neptune is going to be stationing retrograde, and then also Sun squaring Saturn, both of those happening in Aries. So that activates your 9th house. It's going to be bringing some questions around belief, meaning, what's truth for you, higher education. It could also be related to travel or spirituality, publishing, if that would be applicable to you. But this is the house of your larger worldview. So you might be reassessing what you believe, what you're aiming for, and whether that old version still gives you enough direction to be able to move forward. So the invitation for you is to give yourself some space before you make anything visible, By the time the Cancer new moon comes around, you might be ready to begin again on an internal level, right? As a way of clearing out those things that no longer belong, maybe reconnecting with your inner guidance on a new level. Also probably preparing for a more honest chapter once that sun moves into Leo. Best of luck to you, Leo. For Virgo Rising, your story is going to be changing around community and friendships, career, your shared goals, and the future that you are trying to build. Cancer is your 11th house, so we've got the Mercury Retrograde and also the Cancer new moon there. Those two things are going to be asking you to revisit your relationship with your networks, your collaborations, your community, any of your long-term goals. You probably are going to be reconsidering maybe where you belong, who you are aligned with in the future, and whether that old dream that you have, or possibly dreams, do those still reflect who you actually want to be now, right? A friendship, maybe a group dynamic, or some sort of future plan is probably going to need some level of emotional honesty from you. At the same time, Mars and Uranus are going to meet up in Gemini. That would be your 10th house. So this can really accelerate developments around career, visibility, leadership, also the public direction. Something probably professionally is going to move quickly or shift unexpectedly. It could just be requiring you to respond in real time, right? With some level of urgency. This can probably bring pressure, right? And it's probably also going to reveal that a path forward is a little bit different than something that you had considered in the past. Now, Neptune will be stationing retrograde, and then the sun squaring Saturn, both of those planets in Aries. So that will activate your 8th house. That's going to bring some deeper questions around trust, shared resources, debts, intimacy. It's all of your energetic entanglements, right? And the emotional vulnerability that you feel. You might be recognizing where you need to have some stronger boundaries, or where there's some old fears that have been really influencing your choices. And the invitation for you is to stay flexible without losing your discernment. By the time of the Cancer new moon, you might be ready to begin again with some sort of clearer sense of who belongs in your future, what are the things that truly support you, and also feel mutual, and then what goals really deserve your continued investment. Good luck to you. For Libra Rising, your story is going to be changing around career, public direction, your belief system, your relationships, and it's also the larger version of you that you are trying to follow and stay with. Now, Cancer is the 10th house for you. So you've got Mercury retrograde and also the new moon falling there, asking you to revisit your professional path, your reputation, right? Opportunities for leadership, just your long-term goals in general. So you might be reconsidering what success means to you. What does it look like to you? Maybe what role you are meant to play publicly. Could also just be whether your old career story reflects the person that you are becoming now. Same time, we've got Mars and Uranus in Gemini. That'll be activating your 9th house. So that can really accelerate developments around topics of education, travel, spirituality. Any sort of legal matters are going to fall here. It could also be teaching, but it's your worldview, right? There's a belief that might be shifting quickly. Maybe some new information is going to challenge the old perspectives that you hold. And you might be realizing that the larger story here that you have been trying to follow needs to have some breathing room so that it can evolve. Now, Neptune is going to station retrograde, and then also the sun is going to square Saturn, both of those happening in Aries. So that'll be activating your 7th house. It's going to be bringing some reflection around your relationships, commitments, and the people that you are building with. So you might be seeing more clearly here where partnerships are going to require a new level of maturity or honesty, or just maybe some healthier boundaries. And then the invitation for you around the new moon is with your public direction, right? It's probably going to change as that inner truth becomes clearer. So by the time of the new moon, you might be ready to begin again professionally, or just make some more conscious choices about the path that you're willing to stand behind. Best of luck to you, Libra. For Scorpio Rising, your story is changing around belief, truth, shared resources. It's also about trust and the way that you manage your daily responsibilities. Cancer is your 9th house, so Mercury Retrograde and the new moon are going to fall here. I'm going to be asking you to revisit your larger perspective. This may bring some reflection around spirituality, education, travel, could be any legal matters that you are involved in, or maybe just the beliefs that really help to make sense of your life. Well, something that you once assumed to be true might need some new level of emotional honesty, right? Especially if your worldview has been shaped by some really old experiences or family narratives, or just the need for you to feel secure. Now, at the same time, Mars and Uranus are going to meet in Gemini, which is your 8th house. So this can really accelerate developments around your shared money, debt, taxes. It's also about intimacy and trust, right? And our emotional vulnerability. It's all of our entanglements on an emotional level. Now, something beneath the surface is probably going to be moving quickly here, right? Maybe it's a financial or an emotional matter. It's going to require some level of strategy, flexibility, or maybe just a different level of honesty than was there before. Neptune will be stationing retrograde, and the Sun is going to make a square to Saturn. Both of those planets are in Aries, so that activates your 6th house. Going to bring up questions around your health, your work, your routines, the discipline that you put yourself through, right? It's what your daily life is actually asking from you here in the 6th house. Now, you might be seeing more clearly where exhaustion or avoidance or just unclear expectations have really affected your ability to be able to function well. The invitation is to stay grounded while your understanding expands. By the time of the Cancer new moon, you might be ready to begin again with a new belief system, a different plan, some sort of path forward that reflects what you now understand and not just what you were basically taught to accept. Good luck to you. For Sagittarius Rising, your story is changing around shared resources, relationships, agreements, and the deeper emotional truth that's behind what it is that you are carrying. So Cancer is the 8th house for you. You've got Mercury retrograde and the new moon falling here, and they're going to be asking you to revisit themes around trust and intimacy, debt and taxes, also any shared money you have with another person or entity, right? This is our emotional entanglements house. You might be reconsidering what you owe, what another person owes you, where you have support that feels mutual, and where certain attachments probably need a new level of honesty. This is not really surface level stuff for you. It's going to be asking you to look at what is beneath the visible situation. Now, at the same time, you've got Mars and Uranus in Gemini, which is your 7th house. So this can really accelerate developments in relationships, partnerships, any contracts that you have or clients. It's all of your close personal relationships. A conversation could move very quickly. Someone might surprise you with information. There's also an agreement that might need to change, right? So you might be realizing that a relationship pattern just can't continue on in the same form. Now, Neptune is stationing retrograde in Aries, and then also Sun is going to square to Saturn in Aries. So that activates the 5th house for you. This is going to bring some questions around romance, creativity, children if you have them, how you express and feel joy, and what you truly want to create. So you might be reassessing where desire or responsibility or emotional risks really need to be met. There is an invitation for you around the time of the new moon to respond with a new level of honesty, right? Rather than avoidance. So by the time the new moon comes around, you might be ready to begin again with some clearer boundaries, maybe a deeper trust in yourself and the decisions that you make. Could also just be more conscious understanding of what you are truly willing to share. Best of luck to you, Sagittarius. For Capricorn Rising, your story is changing around relationships, work and health, daily responsibilities, and the private foundations that actually support your life. Now, Cancer is the 7th house for you. Mercury Retrograde and the new moon are going to fall here and are going to be asking you to revisit your partnerships, your relationships, your agreements, any clients you have, contracts that you've signed, right? This is the close, personal, one-to-one dynamics in your life. Now, you might be reconsidering what certain relationships need from you. You might be considering what it is you need from others, or whether the old sort of emotional patterns that really shape the way that you connect with others and negotiate or commit to them, whether that needs some additional review. At the same time, Mars and Uranus are going to meet in Gemini, which is your 6th house. So that is definitely going to accelerate developments around routines, work, health habits, schedules, your co-workers. It's all of the daily systems that you rely on. So something in your everyday life is going to need to shift and probably do that quickly, especially if there's some sort of old routine that just doesn't feel sustainable anymore, right? Probably is going to bring some disruption, but it can also reveal a better way for you to manage your energy. Now, Neptune is going to be stationing retrograde, and then the Sun squaring Saturn. Both of those planets are in Aries currently. That's going to activate the 4th house for you, which brings up those deeper questions about family and home and roots and what you're trying to sort of carry on privately. And you might be seeing more clearly where your foundation really needs some repair or a new level of maturity or just more honest boundaries. Well, the invitation for you is going to be trying to notice how your private life, your daily life, and your relational life are all sort of speaking to each other. So by the time of that Cancer new moon, you might be ready to begin again in your partnerships, right? Not because you are over-functioning, which is very likely, or trying to hold everything together all alone, but because you're creating some relationships and agreements that feel more emotionally mature and honest and sustainable. Good luck to you, Capricorn. For Aquarius Rising, your story is changing around work, health, routines, creativity, communication, and how you manage your energy from day to day. Cancer is your 6th house, so Mercury retrograde here, Cancer new moon here. Going to be asking you to revisit your daily life. And this might bring some reflection around your work responsibilities, your health habits, your routines, the schedule that you keep, co-workers that you have, right? It's your service to others, but it's also the systems that you depend on in order to function well. So something in your everyday life might need to be adjusted around this time in a way so that it supports your emotional well-being, not just the productivity that you need to crank out. Now, at the same time, then, Mars and Uranus are going to meet in Gemini, and that's your 5th house. This is likely to accelerate developments around romance, creativity, joys or passions. It's how you express yourself. Could also be children if you have them. There's a creative idea that might arrive very quickly, right? Could be a romantic or a personal desire that shifts you. But you're probably going to feel a stronger need to just break out of your routines and really the life that feels so very predictable and or just emotionally flat right now. Now, Neptune is stationing retrograde, and then the Sun is going to square Saturn in Aries. So that's 3rd house for you. This is going to bring you some questions around communication, your mindset, learning, siblings, your neighbors, right? It's your local life in this house. And it's the way that you interpret all of the information from that. So you might be seeing more clearly now where your old thought patterns or conversations or assumptions need to level up in maturity. The invitation is to let your daily life become more honest, humane, and sustainable. Now, by the Cancer new moon, you might feel ready to begin again with a routine that actually protects your energy and supports your health. You could also be just leaving more room for the creative or personal side of life that is really trying to emerge at this time. Good luck to you, Aquarius. For Pisces Rising, your story is going to be changing around creativity and joy, also your home and family. It's your money and your values, and what you are allowing yourself to create from the heart. So Cancer is the 5th house for you. You've got Mercury Retrograde there, but also the new moon, and that's going to be asking you to revisit your relationship with topics of joy and creativity and romance and pleasure. It's also the house of children if you have them, right? This is the house of self-expression. So you might be reconsidering what actually makes you feel alive, what you want to create, and whether there's some old emotional story that has limited your willingness to be seen or loved or just express yourself creatively. Now, at the same time, Mars and Uranus are going to be meeting in Gemini, so that's your 4th house. That's likely to accelerate developments around home and family and the living situations, but also your private life, right? It's your emotional foundations here. So something in your inner world or your domestic life might shift pretty quickly. It's going to require some flexibility from you as well. Now, this could also reveal where old foundations that no longer really support your future are going to be asking you to take a look at what are you trying to build here. Now, Neptune is going to be stationing retrograde in Aries. The Sun is also going to square Saturn in Aries. That is your 2nd house. So activating that brings some questions around money and security, your possessions, your self-worth. It's also your own personal values. So you might be seeing a little more clearly where fear or idealism or just the pressure that you feel has really shaped your relationship with your stability. So the invitation for you here is to let your joy become part of the rebuilding process. So the invitation is to let your joy become part of the rebuilding process. By the time the Cancer new moon comes around, you might be ready to begin again with a more honest connection to what it is that you love, what you value, or just what deserves your creative energy as you move forward. Good luck to you, Pisces.